The control room remains in a stable state. It does not signal activity, and it does not acknowledge presence. Its systems continue to operate without interruption, maintaining conditions that do not require attention or adjustment. Before anything else settles, allow your attention to rest. There is nothing here that requires effort or direction. You do not need to focus or adjust. The space does not ask to be followed or understood. It remains present whether it is noticed clearly or allowed to remain in the background. The service corridor continues as part of the building's ongoing operation. It does not announce itself, and it does not present itself as a destination. Its function is not to draw attention, but to remain available without interruption. The corridor exists without signaling entry or exit, maintaining its condition regardless of presence. Surfaces remain aligned along its length. Walls hold their position without variation. The floor extends evenly, without guiding movement forward or backward. There is no shift in proportion that would suggest progression or retreat. Distance remains stable, existing as a measure rather than something to be crossed. The air within the corridor is regulated to remain unnoticed. It does not introduce temperature or movement that would require awareness. There is no draft to follow and no change to register. The air exists only to preserve the environment in its maintained state, supporting continuity without becoming part of the experience. Light is distributed evenly throughout the space. It does not originate from a visible source, and it does not emphasize structure or depth. Illumination remains steady, allowing surfaces to stay visible without drawing focus. There are no shadows that suggest motion, and no contrast that encourages inspection. Sound remains present without forming an event. A low mechanical presence continues at a constant level, integrated into the corridor rather than imposed upon it. It does not fluctuate or resolve into silence. Its role is to confirm that the environment is supported, operating continuously beyond immediate awareness. Doors appear at regular intervals along the walls. They remain closed and indistinguishable from one another. Their repetition does not suggest order or sequence. There is no reason to pause or compare. Each door maintains the same relationship to the corridor as the next, contributing to structure without asserting importance. The corridor does not mark time. There are no indicators of duration or change. Lighting remains consistent, and the environment does not reference anything outside itself. Moments do not separate clearly from one another. Awareness does not need to track how long it remains present. Attention can remain settled without direction. There is no need to orient forward or backward. The service corridor does not frame itself as a passage to somewhere else. It exists as a maintained environment, continuing quietly without destination. The corridor does not respond to observation, and it does not alter itself through attention. Remaining within it does not reveal variation, but it allows consistency to become more apparent. Nothing competes for focus. Nothing requires interpretation. The corridor sustains its condition without requiring engagement. It does not resist attention, and it does not invite it. Its presence remains consistent whether it is observed directly or allowed to recede. The space does not adapt or respond. It continues in the same maintained state, allowing awareness to remain without adjustment or expectation. Within this steady condition, awareness does not need to resolve anything. It can remain present without effort, resting within the corridors maintain neutrality as the space continues exactly as it is. The service corridor continues beyond immediate awareness. It does not distinguish one section from another. Surfaces maintain their relationship without adjustment. Distance remains present without becoming significant. There is no signal that marks progression or transition. The corridor allows awareness to remain without orientation. There is no visual or auditory cue that suggests direction. The space does not narrow or widen. Its proportions remain consistent, allowing perception to disperse rather than focus. The air continues to circulate at a regulated pace. It does not introduce variation. There is no change in temperature to register. Its movement is functional rather than expressive, supporting the environment without becoming part of the experience. Light remains evenly distributed. It does not gather or diminish. There is no gradient to follow. Illumination does not emphasize depth or surface. The corridor remains visible without presenting focal points. Sound continues as a low, uninterrupted presence. It does not draw closer or recede. It remains embedded within the structure rather than imposed upon it. There is no rhythm to follow and no pattern to resolve. Its consistency confirms that the environment is maintained continuously beyond immediate awareness. Doors appear at regular intervals. They remain closed and indistinguishable. There is no reason to pause or compare. Each door maintains the same relationship to the corridor as the next. Time remains unmarked. There are no indicators of duration or change. Lighting does not shift, and sound does not vary. The corridor does not provide reference points that would separate one moment from another. Attention does not need to move forward or backward. There is no benefit in tracking distance. The corridor does not frame itself as a passage. It exists as a maintained environment rather than a route. The longer the space is perceived, the more its consistency defines the experience. Nothing within it competes for focus. There is no hierarchy among surfaces or systems. Each element maintains its function without asserting importance. The corridor sustains itself without interruption. It does not require engagement, and it does not resist it. It exists in the same condition regardless of observation. Awareness does not need to resolve anything. It can remain present, resting within continuity rather than movement. The corridor no longer presents itself as a sequence of surfaces. It exists as a continuous condition that does not require differentiation. Awareness does not move from one element to another. It remains distributed, held evenly across the space without settling on any single point. The maintained systems within the corridor continue without variation. Their operation does not form cycles that can be detected. There is no sense of increase or decrease. No adjustment becomes apparent. The mechanical presence remains integrated, not separate from the corridor itself. Light remains unchanged, but its steadiness becomes less noticeable over time. It does not disappear, yet it no longer registers as a distinct feature. Illumination does not guide attention or suggest depth. It allows surfaces to remain present without emphasis, supporting visibility while encouraging perception to soften. Walls and floor continue without distinction. Their surfaces do not invite comparison. Texture does not assert itself. Pattern does not emerge. Each moment within the space mirrors the next without becoming repetitive or demanding recognition. Doors remain closed and indistinguishable. Their repetition does not suggest order or progression. There is no reason to identify one over another. The air continues its regulated movement. It does not create sensation beyond maintaining equilibrium. There is no temperature shift to register. No current draws awareness. The air exists to preserve the environment rather than to be experienced. Time does not advance in a way that can be measured. There are no internal markers that separate moments. Duration does not accumulate meaning. Awareness does not track how long it remains present. There is no sense of approach toward an end. The corridor does not suggest arrival or departure. It does not frame itself as a passage. It exists as a sustained environment, continuing without destination. The longer the corridor is perceived, the less it asserts itself as an object. It becomes a background condition rather than a subject. Awareness does not need to hold on to it. The space remains whether it is actively perceived or allowed to recede. Within this maintained neutrality, perception does not need to resolve anything. There is no transition to anticipate. Nothing within the corridor asks to be completed or understood. The maintained condition continues without forming sequence. Moments do not separate cleanly. They overlap, losing definition, allowing awareness to remain present without tracking progression. The corridor does not offer stages or thresholds. It does not deepen through attention. It remains evenly sustained, neutral in the same way from one moment to the next. The mechanical support of the environment continues without rhythm. It does not pulse or repeat in a way that can be followed. Its constancy becomes indistinct. Sound remains, but it no longer presents itself as something to notice. It exists as steady confirmation that the corridor remains supported beyond immediate awareness. Light continues to perform its function without variation. It does not suggest shape or distance. Over time, illumination becomes less a feature of the space and more a condition within which the space remains legible. There is no shift that invites focus. Brightness and shadow remain balanced to the point of neutrality. Attention softens further. The boundaries of the corridor maintain their relationship without asserting presence. Walls and floor do not distinguish themselves through texture or reflection. Their surfaces no longer register as separate components. They merge into a single maintained enclosure that does not invite inspection or response. Attention does not move through the corridor. It does not advance, retreat, or pause. Direction loses relevance. The corridor is not experienced as a passage, but as a state that surrounds awareness evenly. There is no sense of approaching or leaving. Orientation becomes unnecessary. As perception remains within the space, the need to identify elements diminishes. The corridor no longer presents itself as a collection of features. It exists as continuous background, stable and unchanged. Awareness does not need to engage actively. It can remain present without holding on to any single aspect. Time does not present itself as progression. There is no internal measure that separates earlier from later. The maintained environment does not suggest sequence. It does not offer cues that would require tracking. Duration becomes diffuse, losing clarity as attention settles further into the unchanging condition. The corridor does not respond to continued presence. It does not alter itself through observation. It remains consistent, allowing perception to soften rather than sharpen. The space does not communicate meaning. It maintains itself, unchanged, without requiring acknowledgement. Within this sustained neutrality, awareness does not need to resolve or conclude anything. There is no change to follow. There is no transition to anticipate. The corridor continues as it is, holding its condition without interruption. The corridor continues without registering continued awareness. It does not become more familiar, and it does not recede. Its condition remains evenly maintained, unaffected by duration. There is no threshold at which perception changes its relationship to the space. The corridor remains present in the same way, regardless of how long attention rests within it. The environment does not develop layers over time. Nothing accumulates. There is no gradual revelation, no subtle transformation that distinguishes one moment from the next. The maintained systems do not signal their operation. They continue without pattern, without emphasis, and without variation that could be followed. Attention does not need to organize itself within the space. There is no foreground and no background. The corridor does not offer points of focus that would require selection. Awareness can remain diffuse, spread evenly without settling. The space does not demand interpretation, and it does not provide material for analysis. The sense of enclosure remains constant. Boundaries do not press inward, and they do not dissolve. The corridor neither opens nor closes. It holds its proportions without asserting scale. Distance does not become meaningful. Near and far lose distinction as perception remains evenly distributed. As the maintained condition continues, the idea of remaining becomes less defined. There is no moment that marks arrival, and no indication of departure. The corridor does not present itself as a place to move through. It exists as a sustained state rather than a location with purpose. Within this continuity, awareness is not required to follow sequence or direction. The space does not frame itself as passage between points. It maintains itself without orientation. Perception does not advance or retreat. It remains suspended within the same unchanging condition. The corridor persists without registering presence or absence. It does not alter itself through attention, and it does not withdraw when attention softens. It remains consistent, allowing awareness to remain without effort, without expectation, and without the need to resolve anything. The maintained condition does not intensify as awareness remains within it. It does not become deeper or more pronounced. Consistency does not accumulate weight. It remains evenly distributed, allowing perception to remain without pressure or expectation. Nothing within the corridor begins to stand out. No surface gains prominence. No system becomes more noticeable. Sound, light, and air remain balanced in the same relationship. They continue together as a single maintained state. Awareness does not encounter edges that would require orientation. There is no center to move toward and no perimeter to acknowledge. The corridor does not present itself as something that surrounds perception. Instead, perception rests within it without needing to locate itself. The absence of change does not register as stillness. It registers as continuity. There is no moment when the environment feels paused or active. It simply remains in operation without variation that could be measured. Attention does not need to confirm that the corridor is still present. Its condition does not fluctuate. Nothing signals reinforcement or decay. The maintained environment holds itself without reference to duration. As time continues without markers, the idea of remaining loses definition. There is no longer a sense of staying or leaving. The corridor does not offer contrast that would separate one moment from another. Experience becomes uniform without becoming dull. Perception does not distinguish between observing and allowing. Both occur without effort. The corridor does not respond differently to either. It remains unchanged regardless of how awareness relates to it. The maintained systems do not reveal cycles or patterns. Their operation does not suggest repetition. They do not resolve into rhythm. Continuity remains uninterrupted, without rise or fall. Within this sustained neutrality, awareness does not need to rest on anything specific. There is no advantage in holding detail or releasing it. The environment remains consistent either way. The corridor does not become familiar through duration. It does not recede into abstraction. Its condition remains evenly present, independent of recognition. Nothing within it accumulates meaning or significance. As perception remains diffuse, the distinction between space and awareness softens. There is no merging and no separation that can be identified. The corridor continues as a maintained condition rather than an object. Within this continuity, nothing requires completion. There is no transition to prepare for. No conclusion forms. The corridor remains exactly as it has been, allowing awareness to remain suspended without movement, without anticipation, and without the need to resolve anything. The corridor remains present without asserting itself as a space to be noticed. It does not introduce difference, and it does not deepen through continued presence. Its maintained condition remains evenly distributed, unchanged by duration or attention. The systems that support the corridor continue without emphasis. Their operation does not signal activity or rest. There is no variation that would suggest adjustment. Everything required for the space to remain stable continues quietly beyond immediate awareness. Light remains steady without becoming a feature. It does not draw attention to surfaces or edges. There is no contrast that suggests depth or distance. Illumination allows the corridor to remain visible without inviting focus. Sound continues as a low, integrated presence. It does not form rhythm or pattern. There is no change in intensity to register. The sound does not announce function. It simply confirms that the environment remains supported. The air maintains its regulated movement. It does not introduce sensation that would require awareness. There is no current to follow and no temperature shift to register. The air supports equilibrium without becoming part of experience. Walls and floor continue without distinction. Their surfaces do not assert texture or pattern. There is no detail that encourages inspection. The corridor does not present itself as a collection of components, but as a single maintained environment. Doors remain present without implication. They do not suggest sequence or order. Their repetition does not form rhythm. Each door maintains the same relationship to the corridor as the next. Time does not assert itself within the space. There are no internal cues that suggest duration or progression. Moments do not separate clearly from one another. The corridor allows perception to remain without tracking change. Attention does not need to settle or move. There is no benefit in directing awareness forward or backward. The corridor does not frame itself as a passage. It exists as a maintained condition rather than a route. The longer awareness remains present, the less the corridor distinguishes itself. It does not become more familiar. It does not recede. Its condition remains evenly sustained, allowing perception to remain without adjustment. Within this continuity, nothing requires response. There is no signal to follow and no structure to resolve. The corridor continues as it is, maintaining stability without interruption. The maintained condition does not shift as awareness remains present. There is no point at which the corridor begins to register differently. It does not become quieter in a way that can be measured, and it does not become more active. The corridor continues in the same mode, holding its neutrality without change. Sound, light, and air continue without rearranging their balance. None of these elements asserts priority. They do not separate into foreground and background. They remain integrated as conditions of the environment, continuing without events or transitions. Light maintains its steady distribution. It does not gather or disperse. It does not create gradients that would indicate distance. Brightness and shadow remain balanced to the point of neutrality. Surfaces remain visible without emphasis, and nothing within the visual field becomes more significant than anything else. Sound remains present without developing rhythm. It does not form cycles that can be followed. There is no rise or fall, no indication of adjustment. Its constancy does not invite attention, and it does not withdraw when ignored. It remains steady enough to be indistinct and present enough to prevent silence from becoming noticeable. The air continues its regulated movement without forming sensation. There is no draft to track, and no temperature shift to register. The air does not interact with surfaces in a way that would create texture or variation. It exists to preserve equilibrium, supporting continuity without becoming a feature of experience. Walls and floor continue to hold their position without distinction. Their surfaces do not assert pattern or texture. Nothing develops that would encourage inspection or comparison. The corridor does not offer details that accumulate or resolve. Each moment mirrors the next without forming progression. Doors remain closed and unremarkable. Their repetition does not suggest order or sequence. Spacing does not invite counting. No single door distinguishes itself through light, sound, or surface. Their presence remains structural rather than meaningful. Time remains without markers. The corridor does not indicate how long awareness has remained present. There is no internal signal of duration. Moments overlap without separating cleanly. The environment remains evenly sustained, allowing perception to remain without tracking change. Attention does not need to engage selectively. There is no benefit in isolating sound from light or surface from structure. The corridor allows awareness to remain diffuse, spread evenly without settling. Nothing demands interpretation or response. The maintained environment does not accumulate meaning through duration. It does not reveal itself over time. There is no gradual transformation that distinguishes one moment from the next. The corridor remains stable, maintained, and unchanged. The sense of enclosure remains constant. Boundaries do not press inward, and they do not dissolve. The corridor neither opens nor closes. It holds its proportions without asserting scale. Near and far do not become meaningful as awareness remains evenly distributed. As continuity remains unbroken, the idea of progression loses relevance. The corridor does not frame itself as a passage between points. It exists as a sustained condition, continuing without destination. Awareness does not need to locate itself within it. Within this neutrality, perception does not need to resolve or conclude anything. There is no transition to anticipate. The corridor continues exactly as it is, allowing awareness to remain present without effort, without expectation, and without movement. The maintained condition remains evenly distributed without intensifying. It does not become more pronounced through continued presence. Nothing within the corridor gathers emphasis or fades from relevance. The environment holds its balance without adjustment, allowing perception to remain without pressure. There is no accumulation of detail that would lead toward recognition. The corridor does not clarify itself through duration. Remaining within it does not produce difference. Consistency persists without becoming heavy or insistent. Sound, light, and air continue to coexist without hierarchy. None of these elements asserts dominance or recedes into absence. They remain aligned as conditions of the same maintained system, supporting continuity without forming events. Attention does not encounter edges that would require orientation. There is no center to move toward and no boundary to acknowledge. The corridor does not surround awareness so much as it sustains it evenly. The absence of change does not register as stillness. It registers as continuation. There is no moment that suggests pause or activity. The environment remains operational without variation that could be measured. Awareness does not need to confirm stability. Nothing signals reinforcement or decay. The corridor remains present without fluctuation, independent of duration or observation. As time continues without markers, the sense of remaining becomes diffuse. There is no longer a clear distinction between staying and leaving. The corridor does not provide contrast that would separate one moment from another. Experience becomes uniform without becoming empty. Perception does not distinguish between holding attention and releasing it. Both occur without effort. The corridor does not respond differently to either. Its condition remains unchanged regardless of how awareness relates to it. The maintained systems do not develop rhythm or cycle. They do not suggest repetition or sequence. Continuity remains uninterrupted, without rise or fall. Within this sustained neutrality, awareness does not need to rest on any element. There is no advantage in focusing or diffusing further. The environment remains consistent either way. The corridor does not become familiar through continued presence. It does not recede into abstraction. Its condition remains evenly present, unaffected by recognition. Nothing within it accumulates significance or meaning. As perception remains diffuse, the distinction between space and awareness softens. There is no merging and no separation that can be identified. The corridor continues as a maintained condition rather than an object within experience. Within this continuity, nothing requires completion. There is no transition to prepare for. No conclusion forms. The corridor remains exactly as it has been, allowing awareness to remain suspended without movement, without anticipation, and without the need to resolve anything. The corridor continues to hold its condition without adjustment. Nothing settles into emphasis, and nothing fades into absence. The environment remains evenly sustained, allowing perception to remain without needing to confirm stability. There is no moment that marks change. The corridor continues exactly as it is, maintaining continuity without interruption. The corridor remains present without signaling continuation or completion. It does not suggest that anything has reached an endpoint. The maintained condition holds itself evenly, without diminishing or resolving. Awareness does not encounter a sense of conclusion. The space continues without marking transition. The environment does not require attention to remain intact. It does not depend on observation. The corridor sustains itself independently, maintaining the same relationship between surfaces, air, and light. Nothing shifts as perception remains within it. Nothing withdraws as attention softens. Light continues without variation. It does not change to indicate closure or passage. Illumination remains steady, allowing the corridor to remain visible without emphasis. There is no signal that would suggest movement toward an end. The visual field remains neutral and undisturbed. Sound remains integrated into the space without alteration. The low mechanical presence does not fade or intensify. It does not resolve into silence. It remains constant, confirming continuity without drawing focus. Nothing interrupts its steady presence. The air continues its regulated movement. It does not introduce sensation that would require awareness. There is no current to follow and no temperature shift to register. The air supports equilibrium without becoming part of experience. Walls and floor continue without distinction. Their surfaces do not assert texture or pattern. There is no detail that encourages inspection. The corridor does not present itself as a collection of components. It exists as a single maintained environment. Doors remain present without implication. They do not suggest sequence or order. Their repetition does not form rhythm. Time does not assert itself within the space. There are no internal cues that suggest duration. Moments do not separate clearly from one another. The environment remains evenly sustained. Attention does not need to move or settle. There is no benefit in directing awareness. The corridor does not frame itself as a passage. It exists as a maintained condition rather than a route. The longer awareness remains present, the less the corridor distinguishes itself. It does not become more familiar. It does not recede. Its condition remains evenly sustained, allowing perception to remain without adjustment. Within this continuity, nothing requires response. There is no signal to follow. There is no structure to resolve. The corridor continues as it is, maintaining stability without interruption. The maintained condition does not shift as awareness remains present. There is no point at which the corridor begins to register differently. It does not become quieter or more active. The corridor continues in the same mode, holding its neutrality without change. Sound, light, and air continue without rearranging their balance. None of these elements asserts priority. They do not separate into foreground and background. The corridor remains steady. The environment does not require orientation. There is no change that suggests progression. The corridor continues as it is. Nothing within it demands resolution. It remains present without effort. The environment maintains its condition. There is no accumulation of difference. The corridor continues to exist as it is. Nothing alters its state.